I just think that a lot of what you guys are doing is bleeding into the community. Mm-hmm. And I think it's awesome.
That's our hope. We obviously, if we can be encouraging to our community, we want to be.
That's a huge gift.
Yes, it is. Incredible.
Welcome to the table. A couple of good friends joining us today. Jeff Nelsen, former senior pastor, now equipping pastor at Cherry Hills Church here in Springfield. Jeff and I have known each other for a number of years, and one of the folks I hold in the highest regard.
Nice
Glad to have you here. And Mike O'Shea, president and CEO of O'Shea Builders. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, fellas.
We, Brad and I have been privileged enough to be invited by the two of you to participate in some of your leadership development, I'm going to say programs for lack of a better word, book studies, Bible studies, the integration of work and faith that you guys have kind of introduced in many ways over the years to the business community. And we talk a lot about it.
Yep. It's one of the coolest things that I've ever participated in. And that's why we wanted to have you here
very
today.
impactful.
Yeah.
What you contribute to the community in many ways, but through that specifically is just off the charts. And we wanted to have our folks who pay attention to this crazy program every once in a while hear your story. People love to hear the story behind the story, and I know you two have known each other and been friends for many years, so the stage is yours. So I will say this, and I don't know if this gave birth to what you're doing today. I have been privileged to be a part of your, I guess you'd call it your team of folks who do the Emerging Leaders Group, the Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. I've done the sacrifice chapter for a bunch of years now. And I don't know if that gave birth to this, but that's also been a great gift to the community.
Yeah. It's all intertwined. It's all intertwined. And, I think the idea that we can't separate the sacred from the secular, and part of the way we honor God is through competence in our work and becoming the best version of ourselves as we can, and how we show up. All that, I think, becomes the genesis of the things that Jeff and I did together. Maybe we'll get to that more in depth later, but it's been an interesting journey with Jeff. We've talked about this in the past. I met Jeff in 1995. And I look back in time, my wife was pregnant with our first child, who'll be 28 in a couple days. And so, we've been at this friendship almost 30 years, half of my life. Sure. Which is pretty amazing to me. And it started with a lunch at, used to be Round. I don't even know what it is anymore. But it might have been Round. It might have been that long ago that we had lunch there. Anyway, just struck up a friendship, and at the time, I think we're in a very similar spot in our journey. Both Jeff and I took the reins of our respective organizations from our fathers, and we were stepping into those roles in a very similar time frame. And one of the things we like to joke is that we made a lot of the same mistakes and had opportunities to commiserate over those mistakes. And I think those mistakes, in sincerity, became the basis of a very strong friendship, because we lived through some ups and downs together in both our respective leaderships.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened in 1998 is that my dad was stepping down at Cherry Hills. I had worked with him for several years. And the book, John Maxwell's book that you just mentioned, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, had just come out. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to invite 12 other guys to just meet at 6:30 in the morning, and let's just study one chapter. You remember VHS tapes? We used to stick one of those in the recorder there and watch one chapter at a time. Then we discuss. And Mike was one of those people that I invited. And so you fast forward to 15 years later, in 2014, we're having lunch, I think at Sangamo Club one day, and he said, hey, remember when we did that 15 years ago? We should do that again. And I had just had the same thought a few weeks earlier. Wow. And I said, I agree. And Mike said, I'm in a different place now. I have a newer facility. I've got a nice conference room. I have more resources than I used to have. Mm-hmm. And I'd be willing to pay for the breakfast. I'd be willing to pay for the books. If you invite the people and you facilitate, then I'll host it. Wow. And it just seemed like one of those things. So we took that flyer and invited 12 other leaders, some from Memorial and some from the state, and also another pastor, Roy Newman, Fresh Visions Church, and who'd been a longtime friend. And so we went through the 21 laws, and when we got done, Mike said, I think people still want to keep meeting. They just don't want to meet for 21 weeks in a row again. So we said, what can we do? So he said, what if we did like a 4 or 5 week kind of run, 2 or 3 times more each year and see what they think? And they all agreed to keep going. And during that time, that's when Mike finally had realized that he knew a lot of people in the community. And I'll let you tell this more, Mike, but that's when he started Emerging Leaders, taking that same idea of 21 irrefutable laws of leadership and going to some of the business owners and business leaders that he knew and just said, who are some of the younger leaders? And again, I'll let you tell it from there, but that became a major launching, for us seeing what could happen when leaders all get around a table or all get around a subject and just keep improving.
So. As I look back, if I go back to the first time we collected 12 or so people around the 21 laws, I was, if not the youngest in the group, close to it. And there was a pretty good gap between myself and some of the older people in the group. So there was a huge benefit to me because some of these people were probably 30 years my senior. So there was a chunk of learning that got dispensed. And it was such a simple exercise. I think Jeff bought us the books at the time, and we invested an hour once a week, and it was a pretty easy read. So you had maybe 20 minutes of reading, if that, to prepare for the week. But yet you'd get into these dialogues, and there'd be so much learning. And so as I got on the other side of that, I thought how impactful it was to me. And then as we went through this second exercise, it was equally good. And then the idea of the Emerging Leaders Program was born, kind of a no-brainer. And the change up on that was that we invited community leaders like you, Chris, to participate in it, in facilitating those discussions so that there was a broad group of exposure to other community leaders, very low investment. Think of what you invest in that, probably an hour and a half of prep, an hour of your time. And, you would always get great remarks from when we would do the surveys is that what Chris did was impactful and was helpful. But what a simple way to impact people's lives. So there were 2 tracks running kind of simultaneously. We did that, and then Jeff and I continued on in our group of 12. But at some point, we decided we were going to study the life of David, which was also our second time through David. We'd done that in an earlier season as well. But we encouraged the 12 people there to invite 2 or 3 friends.
Okay.
And it seems to me in that David study, we probably ended up with 40 or more people.
Wow.
And we took, I don't know how many weeks to go through David, and then a couple other studies, and then we landed on the book Every Good Endeavor, which was a really impactful one. So,
yeah, I think part of what I feel passionate about as a pastor, now as a coach, a professional business coach, is that I really want people that spend 75, 80% of their life at work. I want them to know that matters to God and that it's very important. It makes all the difference in a community if they do that well. And so being able to become friends with Mike and him having a venue and also the same passion, we just felt like it all of a sudden was combustible when we both started thinking together, how can we lift up and encourage people, whether they have faith or not? How can we strengthen people in their leadership and in their understanding that work, it matters, it's honorable, it's important, and that God has given all kinds of gifts and talents to people that if they use those well, then everyone wins. And really, I think we've seen our community just benefit by getting around other people that may even be in different sectors of the business world or healthcare world or education world, and just learn from each other.
Yeah.
Sometimes all we have to do is get them together. We don't even have to practically say anything.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think, we did the life of Joseph. We just finished that with you guys. And I think each week, we did it 4 weeks, I believe. I missed 1 week, but I had an O'Shea employee sitting at my table. And Mike Sunley was last week. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, as I think he's going to be the upcoming chief operating officer or something like that.
Right. He's going to be vice president of operations. He just received that promotion.
Yeah, but to listen to him talk about the scripture and how it applies to his life and building an organization, I mean, I'm thinking, man, that is ingenious. And then the other employees that have also talked, when at the beginning of class and shared their experiences, like the gentleman last week that talked. Wow.
Scott Kincaid.
Oh, yeah.
He did a great job.
And then like-kind people are attracted to those people. I mean, I think it's kudos to you.
Yeah.
I mean that. Yeah.
I tell a story frequently that I was probably 21 years old. I never finished college, and I was at an industry event, and a competitor said to me, all you have to do to be successful in this business is hire people smarter than yourself. If you're Mike O'Shea, that is really easy to do.
I don't know about that.
But in all seriousness, the hard part is allowing them to be smarter than myself. Once I did that, you just touched on it, Brad. Good people attract good people.
Yeah.
And just to go back to your comments about Mike Sunley, ditto, agree, all that. But I don't want you to get the impression that Mike O'Shea created that and Mike Sunley. He came that way.
No, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I'm saying, good people at O'Shea attracted good people like that.
Yeah.
And it's become. It's just become a fire of just good people wanting to do good work together. I'm honored to go to work and get to lead these group of people, and so exciting things are happening just as a result of having people like that.
Well, just like, we went to, when I first met Jeff, we went to, is it Little Saigon, your
That's
favorite
our place.
restaurant?
Yep, that's our place.
And I said, Chris, and I think that day I was kind of tired and didn't get a good night's sleep, and we're going to lunch, and I was just like, oh gosh, I wonder what this is going to be like, right? And I mean,
a lot of people wonder that when they're sitting up there and have lunch.
And we talked for an hour and a half, and I told him, much like I'm going to tell you, I mean, there's just a level of energy that you guys exude. You know what I mean? When you're around you guys. And it's the same in your organization. You walk the hallways of that place, I mean, it just feels awesome, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, everything's shiny and nice, and the people are professional. And I just think that a lot of what you guys are doing is bleeding into the community. And I think it's awesome.
That's our hope. We obviously, if we can be encouraging to our community, we want to be.
That's a huge gift.
Yes, it is. Incredible.
Back to the idea of, pouring into people younger than yourself. Jeff, share your analogy about inside, outside near, and outside far, because that's a catalyst for part of what happened.
Yeah, so back to this whole idea of sacred secular. You can imagine as a pastor, when I'm having lunch with different guys in our church that are business owners or business leaders, they're all thinking I'm going to ask them to give a check or to do something to, care about the inside of our church, right? Because that's my world, they think. But I'm more interested in helping them think about their world and how they can, honor God, what they're doing. So years ago, I was thinking about the fact that there's the inside of the church and there's the outside of the church, right? In its most simplistic understanding. And one day as I was meditating on a Bible verse, I realized that when Jesus was talking about his dream, it was a little more nuanced than that. So I started taking napkins at lunch and I would just draw a rectangle and I would divide it into thirds. And in the center third, I would write the word inside. In the left third, I would write the words outside near. And in the right third, I would write the words outside far. Because Jesus said, I want you to be involved both, here, but also nearby and also far away to the ends of the earth. So I started asking different people I'd be having lunch with, if you only had a couple hours a week to make an impact, to make a difference, where would you like to make it? And they almost always looked at me like, "You're a pastor. Is this a trick question?"
Right?
Because the idea that most people have is that all I care about is the inside.
Right.
And years ago, I was in a group of pastors where a guy had come in to facilitate with us, and he said, have you ever heard pastors bemoan that 20% of the people do 80% of the work in a church? And of course, we'd all heard that. Yeah. And he said, you know why that is? He said, because the average vision of most pastors is so puny. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
I remember thinking to myself, wow. So I needed a bigger vision, and I started seeing that inside was just part of the story, that outside near, outside far. Well, anyway, when I would show guys like Mike this, every one of them pointed to outside near. They said, if I can give back to our community, if I could make a difference in our community, I would be over the moon.
Yeah.
And I said, well, then get about it, because the thing is that's just as important to God as what's going on inside the church.
Interesting.
And if we're not being a good church, we're not helping people understand that what you do at work makes a huge difference, and it matters to God. Yeah. So anyway, we'd have those conversations, and Mike had a particular narrative that kept going through his mind that made me have to keep showing him that napkin with those words, because this is hard to break.
Yeah.
For the average business person, they think that if I'm not doing something inside the church, then it's not legit.
Gotcha.
And to me, that's just crazy, because actually what they're doing in the community may be actually a more powerful witness than anything they could do inside the church. So,
absolutely. And Jeff and I'd have these conversations, and you guys know Jeff, he's an encourager. That's definitely one of his gifts, and I would leave those conversations so encouraged. But you get an email I had some friends that left for the mission field in the mid-'90s, and occasionally I'd get an email from them, and they're in a third world country without running water, and you'd get this email rejoicing about the work they're doing, and you'd think, well, I can't be doing God's work here in Springfield because it's not, I'm not taking that leap. But yet God cares about all the people of Springfield just as much as he cares about those souls that my missionary friends are winning in other countries. And so no matter how many times we had that conversation, I just couldn't bring myself to accept that my secular work was noble and valued by God. And then through a series of circumstances, I ended up reading Tim Keller's Every Good Endeavor. And that book just, even though Jeff had said it to me repeatedly.
it shows how much my influence is.
Right. I remember taking that book to lunch with Jeff and just saying, we have got to do a book study on this book. This message has to get out there. And so all that to kind of come back to the idea of having influence and how do we use it. You were saying you're hoping our influence leaks into the community, or I can't remember how you said it, but I do too, because people throughout this city are doing incredibly important work that is caring for God's people, and that may be as an educator, it may be as a healthcare professional, it may be as someone stocking groceries so that God's people can be fed. All these works are ordained by God to serve his people.
And one of the phrases in that book that Mike has really latched onto that's helped me appreciate it more is that we have an opportunity to invest in human flourishing. And that phrase, human flourishing, I think has helped you rethink about how you care for your employees.
Absolutely.
And how you go about the way you build buildings and construct things. And boy, to think that kind of vision is possible. Think about when you actually help someone restore their property.
Absolutely.
That contributes to because people aren't going to flourish in a property that's still flooded and things like that. So once we have that kind of definition of what really matters and how work contributes to society, then now all of a sudden we can literally encourage anybody in their work. Obviously there's several kinds of work that we're not going to encourage people in that are reputable, but most work is very reputable, and it may be behind the scenes, it may be, unseen, but God sees it, and God has ordained it, like Mike said, and we want to make sure that we encourage people in it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, very good. both of you said something I want to circle back to. Jeff, you mentioned being a business coach today. So I'm just curious for you, and I don't want to sidetrack our conversation. I think hopefully it all ties together. In moving from your role as senior pastor at Cherry Hills to being equipping pastor, which I know is your inside work of equipping your leaders there. But you're also coaching a number of business executives in the community through your organization, Jeff Coaching. What's that transition been like for you? How has that unfolded?
It's part of this story. I mean, Mike, when we started doing these emerging leaders groups, I started having lunch or interacting with more and more of those young leaders. In fact, I went through the first cohort of, there have been 8, the first cohort of those 25 to 30 leaders. And Mike gave me permission to go through all 21 laws and sit in all 21 laws with them. And then they're the only cohort so far that's decided to keep meeting. Oh. So for the last 7.5 years, they've been meeting once a month.
Is that right?
Oh,
The
that's
same group.
terrific.
And then in the last
great.
year and a half, they asked me, to officially facilitate their group. But for the most part, those relationships have been very meaningful. Well, on top of that, then when we started doing Every Good Endeavor, Mike asked me to actually write some of these studies we did, like the life of David, just did the life of Joseph. Before that, we did a guy named King Uzziah last year. When I started doing that, then I started having more lunches, more phone conversations, more follow-ups with some of the leaders in our community. I bet I met probably 250 leaders over the last, 10 years.
Wow, man, that's
And
great.
so watching that really gave me a sense that, you know what, I think I have both the gift of encouragement and perhaps practical wisdom, that if I can learn how to listen well, then I may be able to be of help to some of these people.
Sure.
Because there is a lot of overlap in leading a church, a growing church like I did, where you see it scale and you see you have multiple employees and you have all these different things. So team building, culture, all that stuff is what I'm very excited about. And that's really what I do now, is individual coaching as well as team training.
That's awesome.
And by the way, I don't just think you have the gift of encouragement and wisdom.
Yeah.
By the way.
By the way, exactly.
Like have it in bunches.
Again, sometimes when you live all your life inside church world, and it's not that I didn't do consulting before. I can point back to even 25 years ago, being asked by businesses in our city to help them. But I'm saying it never really became as clear to me as when I finally started the snowball effect of working alongside Mike and us seeing those things happen. I saw a need as well as an interest in that, and it seemed like an open door and the perfect time for me to transition my lead role to 2 younger leaders that I think are doing a great job, and our staff is younger. We wanted to keep our church younger. And for me, now that the extremely blonde hair is becoming more prominent, I needed to make sure that I paid attention to that. So,
Well, at least yours isn't falling out. Mine's falling out.
So, Mike, earlier you mentioned, I think the way you said it was you came home from college. So in my time at the Chamber of Commerce, we did a program called Leadership Springfield, and Mike always was gracious enough to sit on a panel that I would facilitate with leaders in the community. And I would always ask Mike to tell his story. And I think your story is awesome because I think it gives people permission to say there's not just one way to go. Everybody doesn't. I think I grew up in a world that said everybody has to go to 4-year university to do anything or be anything, which I think is far from the truth. And your story is just an awesome one, and you've built this incredible business. Would you share that story?
Yeah. So when I graduated from high school, I went out to Lincoln Land, which is a very fine institution. It really is. I think it is such a jewel to this community. I agree. And I appreciate how they're leaning into the workforce. But college was not for me. But my parents wanted me to go. This is the mid-'80s, and the economy's been really hard on my parents, and they don't know if the business is going to survive, so they want me to look elsewhere. And so I my mom and dad were the entirety of our professional staff back then. This is the fall of 1984. And so my mom does the payroll, and 6 or 8 weeks into the school year, she says, Mike, how is it that you're going to school full time and turning in 40 hours a week? I said, well, it turns out I'm not making it to school really regularly, Mom. And she said, define that. And I said, I was there the day they handed out the syllabus. And
Was it as friendly as you're making it?
no, it was pretty cordial.
You know Mike's mom. I'm sure it got very colorful.
And you know, my parents, neither one of them finished college. I mean, I don't think, had it not been for the economy, my parents never would have been heavy for me on college because they loved the family business and they wanted me to go into it. And they didn't see the exception to that. So anyway, my parents said, withdraw from classes so that you don't put yourself in a spot where you can't re-enroll. Next fall, we want you to go away from school, away to school to just get away from your current circumstances. Not that they were bad, but completely try something different. And they said, if you'll do that and apply yourself for one semester, you can make any decision you want to make. Yep. And so I went to SIU at Carbondale, which at the time was pretty notorious as a place to go to have a good time, and I was having a good time. I mean, just like there were things to do down there. Not just it was a party school, but like Giant City was down there. I mean, it was a super cool place. And so after a semester, I came back and I got on the dean's list, and my parents said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'm having a good time. I'm going to go back." And I don't know, maybe 6 weeks into that second semester, it was a Monday night, and I just walked out of class, packed up my dorm, and I drove home. And I got home about the same time my dad did. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I am taking you up on your end of the deal. I'm done, and I'm never going back." And he said, "Do you have your tools?" And I said, "Yes." And this is where you go work in the morning. Yep. And so I did. And then in that, O'Shea was, the economy was recovering. My dad needed a little help in the office. And I said, "Dad, I'll work, and I'll come in the evening. I'll help you in the evening. I'll do whatever." And pretty quickly, my dad was giving me a lot of experience, which I think I stood up to. And by the time I was 28, they turned over the reins of the business to me, sold me most of the interest in the business, and it's been a good journey. My parents were incredible people. Yep. I tell people all the time, I'm sure there are many fine MBA programs in these throughout the nation. I can't imagine one that was better than what I learned from my parents, two people who, barely got out of high school in their own respect. Not that they weren't intelligent people, but they just didn't value that secondary education. Yeah. And so what a good ride. I worked with my dad for almost 45 years. I started going to work with my dad when I was 12 years old, and he died about 18 months ago. And he worked almost to the end of his life.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is a cool story.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It's just a great story. Every time I've heard you tell it, it speaks volumes. I think it gives people permission.
Yeah.
And that everybody doesn't have to follow one track. And
I'm super excited to see some of the community colleges like Lincoln Land leaning into the associate's degrees really hard again and equipping people just to enter the workforce. My son is just wrapping up his college work after 10 years out of high school. He is a non-traditional learner, and he has a capacity to learn. He has a desire to learn. The format in which he learns best is not the traditional classroom. Sure. I think there are so many people like that in the world, myself included. And something else that, just by way of example, years ago, Brad, you probably may participate in one, but I belong to a round table where contractors from across the nation, you'd get in a peer group, 6 or 8 firms, you come together. It's a day of travel to get there. It's a day of travel to get back. And if you spent 2 or 3 days there, about half of it was play. And it wasn't for me. I was busy. I had a young family. And so I remember getting together with some local business leaders and saying, "Hey, let's start our own CEO forum. We'll just invite a bunch of people from Springfield, and we don't compete against each other."
Right.
And now you're part of this, Brad. Right. I mean, this has been going on for 10 or 12 years, and Jeff facilitates this. It was originally Woody Hester was our facilitator. But the learning in that platform is just, in my mind, off the chart, because I think we share many of the same challenges as businesses. And how we respond successfully can often be framed against each other's circumstances. And those meetings that I most enjoy with that group is when somebody brings a challenge, because sometimes I think, well, we've all got the challenge, but this person's the only one courageous enough to contextualize it as their own. And then, and then I'll tell you what my friend would do.
Exactly.
And I'll just jump in and say this. If someone's listening to this today or watching this and they're saying, what can I do with my company or my business? Mm-hmm. Sometimes just starting a small book study. I mean, you guys are doing this here at Peerless.
Yeah.
Just take a small book and say, let's all agree to meet over lunch or to meet before work, and let's just see what we're learning together. Yeah. Then sometimes you can actually really tap into the geniuses of the people in your company or your business. Yeah. Not everybody's going to say yes, but there are going to be some people that might be eager to learn that way. And especially if older and younger can actually mix like that, like Mike was referring to earlier. Yeah. This is something that people can do. You don't have to have a lot of money. You don't have to, but you do have to have a hunger. Right. Yeah. And if people have a hunger for it, I think there's more hunger out there. I think that's what Mike and I are learning. There's more hunger out there for people to be in situations where they can rub shoulders with other people they can learn from. I agree. And people can do this, and then also cross, like you said, cross the sector of different businesses. So it's really surprised us. We've been asked, how did this come about? We almost stumbled into it. Yeah. But we started noticing. I will tell you, when we have people gather, one of the first questions we ask them is, why did you agree to be part of this? Mm-hmm. And I think one lady said it really well years ago. She said, I just have found that I thought I was the only one that had this challenge or this struggle as a leader, and I found out I'm not. Yeah. And that in itself has made me more courageous. And then what other people also say is that I just learn more with other people than I can learn myself. For sure. So those two things have really motivated us to keep trying to offer opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, that's outstanding.
Really
well, like in the Forgiven book that we did, I would read those chapters, and for me, it was a pretty heady book. I mean, I didn't always
pretty
understand.
heady book for anybody.
Yeah, I just didn't understand some of the chapter, quite frankly. And then, you'd sit down and maybe Harry Schmidt had well, I think this. I'm like, oh, I never looked at it that way. Really cool stuff, though, you guys. Really cool.
We do want to say this too. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, I was just going to say, and my mother's really happy I'm doing these classes because she got me a Bible for Christmas, and she could not have been happier, and had my name engraved on it. Now I got to get it a little bit dog-eared and highlighted up so it looks like I'm doing my job with it. So, but she's very happy, Mike. I just want you guys to know that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I think the other thing we would want to say, anybody that's watching or listening, if you're a professional in this city and you've never been part of these studies. Yeah. We would love to have your contact information if you're comfortable. Right. And we'll invite you because really we get about 40, 45 people around tables. Mm-hmm. Mike has just a great state-of-the-art, O'Shea University room now.
It's amazing.
And that's really been nice, and providing a nice breakfast and all the different books. Has been one of the ways Mike reinvests back in the community. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are floored by that.
I am. Yeah.
There is something, and you said it a minute ago, about we learn better from one another than by ourselves. There's something that happens when you get a group of people in a room together.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I'm telling you, we've read 10 minutes of a chapter. You referenced that we're doing some of that. Yeah. And we've been extremely busy since just before Christmas. Yeah. And so we haven't been able to get our group together because the work has to be done. Yeah.
But
we got our group together last week.
Yeah, it was awesome.
For the first time in 6 weeks. Yeah. And it was hard to get people to leave.
Yeah.
Just to be in the room with one anyway.
But that's a direct impact of what you did originally, because Chris brought the idea, so we got the books, and it's just been the culture within our organization is starting to transform because one chapter a week or two chapters. It's amazing.
Yeah. And there's so many good books out there that don't have to be a heavy lift. Yeah. It could be 10 pages of fairly light reading. Yeah. And, I feel like at O'Shea, we've been through the spectrum. I think I've worn some people out with the reading at O'Shea. And we don't make it mandatory. Right. But it's an opportunity to learn and get better together. I just love it. Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes is by Wynton Marsalis, the great jazz musician. And it's just 3 words. He says, "The humble improve." Mm-hmm. And boy, I agree with him. And when I think of humble, I don't think of someone that's like low to the ground.
Right.
I just think of someone who's teachable.
Yeah.
And if we stay teachable, it's so easy to get stagnant. But if we stay teachable, then I think we will improve. And I want to improve myself, and I think we can keep doing that.
I love it.
Yeah, really good.
You got to ask him the question.
The question.
The question.
The question.
Yeah.
So, but almost every time we do one of these with somebody, I always ask. It's not that big of a deal, Brad. But anyway, if you could.
Well, we've learned a lot from the folks that we've asked.
Great answers,
you've
because it always teaches me something for sure. Is if you could look back to your younger self 30 years ago, what advice would you give your younger self 30 years ago based on what you've learned through your life experience?
Yeah. For me, Jeff just touched on it, is, the idea that the humble learn, and just to never attempt to be the smartest person in the room, because we so rarely are. And in those moments, maybe you are the smartest person in the room for a moment in time where you're an expert on a thin portion of content. But just to have an attitude of learning and humility, as opposed to trying to be the smartest person in the room, I think I would have accelerated the organization at a higher rate. And again, I'm extremely pleased with the team at O'Shea, but I think we would have even been at a different place by now had I started that journey younger.
Awesome. Yep.
I talk too much. So I look back, and I look back, especially in my 20s and 30s, and thought I had to impress by showing how much I knew. And in the process, I didn't ever learn more because I was too busy rehashing everything I already knew. And I think I wish I would have listened more quickly, asked questions. In the last 20 years, I've learned the power of a good question. And if I would have, I think I could have learned a lot more if I had just been more teachable myself.
Love it.
So,
What's that saying? You're not learning if you're talking, or you can't. And it's so true of myself too.
Absolutely. Well, I got to tell you, I truly believe that people's paths cross for a reason, and I am certainly glad mine crossed both of yours.
Yeah.
we feel
I
the
mean
same.
that.
Yeah, because we're famous now.
Yeah. You are. You're going to be.
I mean, there'll be two or three people watching.
The fact that this led us to the Peerless podcast, think about
can
it.
you
What
believe
else?
that? I mean, what other heights might you ascend to?
I love that when Mike said, now what led you to do all this? We're not really sure. Joe Rogan does it. I mean, he's pretty famous.
Yeah, it worked out for him.
Trust us had nothing to do with fame. Well, this has been really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really has.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
bunch
Thanks
for
for
your
inviting us.
time, carving out some of your time. I know you have important things to do, but
You know what was
grateful.
It was fun to be here today, guys, and I'm appreciative of the relationship I've built with all of you, and so if you have no other encouragement for doing something like this, I just think the relationships that we build as a result. If you had no other catalyst, it's I think we've all had the opportunity to build some really great relationships through some of these discussions.
And I've learned from some of your other guests. I really appreciate you offering a chance to get to know our community better through this venue.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Very good.
Yep. Thank you.
Good stuff.
All right.
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks.
Yeah.